and welcome to the news analysis of the Indian Express dated 10th June 2020 of the Delhi edition. So today we are going to cover 8 important articles from the Indian Express. First article is relevant for General Studies Paper 2 International Relations for India-China relations. So we have been observing that from the past 2 months many activities is being taken place in the line of actual control. So India China relations is taking place, the activity. You must understand the backdrop in this activity, with the backdrop of this activity. What is the history and the past record of India China relations? But with the present context, what we have observed is that deployments by both sides took place over the last 1 month, and it will take them time to step back. The disengagement process may take weeks. Physical verification as well as satellite imagery will help us in complete disengagement. Sources are saying this. And army sources confirm that troops that move back on either side after the June 6 meeting between 14 Corps Commander Lieutenant General Harinder Singh and South Xinjiang Military District Commander Major General Liu Din at the Chushul Moldo border point. So, in this backdrop, I want to discuss the past record of India China relations. We have been observing about India China relations from many years. What are the records? Although broadly we can say, the relationship between India and China has been cordial. There have been border disputes. The modern relationship began in 1950 when India was among the first countries to end formal ties with Republic of China and recognize the People's Republic of China as the legitimate government of mainland China. What happened in 1962? The Indo-China War took place. We remember the Sino-Indian War of 1962, the Chola incident of 1967, and the 1987 Sino-Indian skirmish. In early 2017 also, India and China clashed at the Doklam Plateau along the disputed Sino-Bhutanese border. Relations between contemporary China and India have been characterized by border disputes, which is taking place now also. In 2008, China became India's largest trading partner, and the two countries have also extended their strategic and military relations. Apart from trade and commerce, there are some other areas of the mutual interest which China and India have been cooperating of late. In the words of Rijal Karim Laskar, a scholar of Indian foreign policy, currently the two countries, India and China, are cooperating on a range of international like trade, climate change, and reform of the global financial order, among others, to promote common interest. If we talk about the geographical overview, India and China are separated by the Himalayas. India and China today share a border with Nepal and Bhutan. The border between India and China is known as McMahon Line. Very important, China and India also dispute most of Arunachal Pradesh. However, both countries have agreed to respect the line of actual control. When we say about line of actual control, we take into account LAC activities. In the past 2 months, many activities have been taking place, but finally, troops have been removed. Now, what is the relation between bilateral trade of India and China? We say China is India's largest trading partner. We have records like Chinese imports from India amounted to $16.4 billion or 0.8% of its overall imports. Conclusion: the diplomatic conversation is supposed to aid the military channels is disengaging. Article 2 from disaster management point of view, General Studies Paper 3. We are all familiar, and we have already discussed yesterday also, that in the past 2 months, from 1st April to 31st May 2020, 11 mild earthquakes have taken place in National Capital Region. Now, what are the causes? The causes is disruptions and disturbance in the seismic activities. In accordance, in the view of the mild earthquakes, many geographical scientists and earthquake specialists are predicting that there is no big event going to occur, but it may occur anytime without any announcement. So, uh, in that perspective, we discussed about earthquake sensor. So, I today want to discuss about seismometer or other words we say about earthquake sensor, also called seismometer. So working and structure and functioning of seismometer to be discussed becomes essential. What are the functions? A seismometer or an earthquake sensor is an instrument that responds to ground motions such as caused by earthquakes, maybe volcanic eruptions or explosions also. Seismometers or earthquake sensors are usually combined with a timing device and a recording device to form a seismograph. The output of such a device, formerly recorded on paper, now recorded and processed digitally, is a seismogram. The data is used to locate and characterize earthquakes and to study the Earth's internal structure. Basic principles goes like this, that a simple seismometer sensitive to up down motions of the earth is like a weight hanging from a spring, both suspended from a frame that moves along with any motion detected. The relative motion between the weight, called the mass, and the frame provides a measurement of the vertical ground motion. A rotating drum is attached to the frame and a pen is attached to the weight, thus recording any ground motion in a seismogram. Early seismometers, if we talk about the look, their models, their working, their structure, their functioning, used optical levers or mechanical linkages to amplify the small motions involved. Recording on soot covered paper or photographic paper. Modern instruments use electronics. In some systems, the mass is held nearly motionless relative to the frame by an electronic negative feedback loop. The motion of the mass relative to the frame is measured, and the feedback loop applies a magnetic or electrostatic force to keep the mass nearly motionless. What are the observations of seismic observatories? What do they record? Seismic observatories usually have instruments measuring three axes, y-axis, x-axis, and z-axis. If only one axis is measured, it is usually the vertical because it is less noisy and gives better records of some seismic waves. Modern instruments, we have some terrestrial broadband seismometer as well. Modern instruments use electrical sensors, in which we are discussing here about earthquake sensors. So this was all about in the basic, so this was about earthquake sensors. Coming to the third article, here we have the article about the academy we need, which is written by a principal of Lady Shri Ram College, University of Delhi, Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath, with relevant for general studies paper 1, education and a society, social issues you can place. So what we want to discuss in accordance with this article, that the academy we need, it is talking about education reforms. Like technology based education is not within the reach of every person. Yesterday also we discussed about that what is the digital divide in education between the rural poor and the urban settlements and the urban students. So what is the backdrop, or what is the analysis, what we can conclude from this article, or we can just brief it about the article is important to understand that very essentially when we talk about education reforms always comes with its own sets of limits. We must talk about the limits. What are the limits involved in education reforms? How can lessen the gap between the rural poor and the urban settlements? So the writer is telling about the official mandates as well. What are the arrangements made by universities, as she's saying, as universities scramble to put together their online infrastructure with insufficient preparation? Learning from home has involved a complete rejig of the spatio-temporal dimension. Distance education, traditionally the less preferred sibling of the regular system, has moved mainstream in its tech avatar. The new normal will see several more unanticipated inversions. Also, we talk about the pivot to online platforms, including the University Grants Commission UGC mandate to shift 25% of teaching online for the future must be carefully calibrated to avoid exclusions that dilute affirmative action initiatives on campuses. It means UGC has recommended to complete the 25% of the total syllabus using online mode like social media or video based lessons. Online mode of teaching should be adopted. We can discuss about that, what is the rural settlements problems, what they face. Current structures of education are attempting to prepare students for futures that we cannot predict. The words of writer Dr. Gopinath of Lady Shri Ram College, University of Delhi. Given the pace of change, we are unable to accurately ascertain what new skills can now be learned for the jobs of tomorrow. The ability to constantly learn and relearn will be key to navigate the maze of the future. you must understand about that. Also, how we can develop self-reliance belief in ourselves. We can develop that, we can ingrain that feature, and what problems they face in rural areas. That regulatory functions like town planning, enforcing building by laws are much needed. Renewal of trade also needed. Licenses are relatively more straightforward as the scale is small compared to urban areas, as scale is small compared to urban areas. In order to perform these functions efficiently, a reformed urban district administration shall have to increasingly use technologies such as mobile governance, geospatial platforms for zonal regulations and property tax, tele-education, and blockchain based networks for record keeping and verification. Also, the writer is saying, as we initiate a post COVID 19 Atmanirbhar nation building exercise, the current urban governance structure must begin rebuilding internal systems, ensuring convergence and fixing accountability at the level of the urban district magistrate. So, it is what we want to discuss from this article. The academy we need, talking about education reforms to lessen the gap between the rural poor students and the urban settlements, talking about digital divide in education, relevant for general studies paper 1. Next article, relevant for general studies paper 3 economy, talking about India's forex reserves or foreign exchange reserves, as they are called. Forex reserves, foreign exchange reserves, they are actually foreign exchange reserves. For plus x, foreign plus exchange, forex reserves, India's forex reserves. Similarly, we have forex reserves of US, China, Russia, many countries. But in this context, I would like to discuss about, like to elaborate or to talk in detail about the background or backdrop of India's forex reserves, why they are rising and why they matter in a crisis. You must know that foreign exchange reserves are always kept for securely places of a country. Like India also has a large foreign exchange reserves, holdings of cash, bank deposits, bonds, and other financial assets denominated in currencies other than India's national currency, that is the Indian rupee. We also know that reserves are managed by the Reserve Bank of India for the Indian government, and also the main component is foreign currency assets. Assets, we say. So, foreign exchange reserves or forex reserves act as the first line of defense for India. In any case, if economic slowdown arises, they can be utilized. But acquisition of reserves has its own cost. What are they? Forex reserves facilitate external trade and payment and promote orderly development and maintenance of foreign exchange market in India. India's forex reserves stand at around US dollar 493,480 as dated 29th May 2020, according to data obtained from Foreign Exchange Assets website. The Economic Survey of India 2014-15 said India could target foreign exchange reserves of US dollar 750 billion to ranging from that to US dollar 1 trillion. Also, as of December 2019, India's forex reserves or foreign exchange reserves are mainly composed of US dollar in the form of US government bonds and institutional bonds. But why do they matter in times of crisis? So that can be utilized. They can be utilized in times of crisis. Reserve Bank of India and Foreign Exchange Management Act 1999. We have some legal provisions as well for forex reserve. What are they? Let's discuss. So the legal provisions for governing the foreign exchange reserves. Reserve Bank of India (RBI) accumulates foreign currency reserves by purchasing from authorized dealers in open market operations. Foreign exchange reserves of India act as a cushion against rupee volatility once global interest rates start rising. The foreign exchange reserves of India consists of four categories: foreign currency assets, gold, special drawing rights (SDRs), and reserve tranche position. Tranche, what we say in Hindi, kist. This was all from this article, relevant for general studies, paper 3, economy. Here, I would like to discuss in brief in the context of George Floyd's death in the US, which sparked protests for racism and the need for police reforms. Two important contemporary issues relevant for general studies paper 1, social issues. Floyd, whose death sparked global protests, laid to rest. But in the context of this article, two important contemporary burning issues needs to be discussed very importantly. First, we have racism in the United States. It is not something new. Racism in the United States has existed since the colonial era. It was when white Americans were given equally, when given legally and socially sanctioned privileges and rights, while these same rights were denied to other races and minorities. Major racially and ethnically structured institutions and manifestations of racism have included genocide, like death of human beings, slavery, segregation, Native American reservations, Native American boarding schools, immigration, and naturalization laws, internment camps. Formal racial discrimination was largely banned by the mid 20th century, and over time some Americans saw the presidential candidacy of Barack Obama, who served as President of the United States from 2009 to 2017 and was nation's first black president. Also, when we say the post-racial era, the election of the Donald Trump, he was a white person, was a chief proponent of the birther movement in the US, which argued falsely that Obama was not born in the United States. So, what about racial minorities? Charlottesville, Virginia, intended to unify various white national factions. Also, consequences, developmental, we say about the schedule of racist events, and 18-item self-report inventory that assesses the frequency of racist discrimination, found that racist discrimination is rampant in the lives of African Americans. Also, yesterday only, Donald Trump has recruited Richard Brown for his army chief, his military chief. He's a black person, African American person. We can just have a look. So, coming to racial segregation and African Americans, what are they? So, African Americans are associated with the segregation patterns in the neighborhoods where they live. We have Civil Rights Act as well, Civil Rights Movement of 1871. We can discuss a lot about societal stereotypes, how we can project them in media. But one issue which is also coming into limelight is the need for police reforms. George Floyd was victim of police brutality. Public is demanding police reforms. Why the police was so brutal for a black person? Systematic racial bias was observed. Now, during the nationwide protests we have observed in the past 2 weeks, and it followed the killing of George Floyd, was a footballer, was a black person, African American person. Protesters or groups called for police reform in the United States. This had led to several laws, proposals, and public directives at all levels of the government to address the police brutality, the police misconduct, and the need for police reforms. So, what are the reforms? What background we can draw? First, we should know George Floyd was a footballer, a black person who was killed by a police officer who was white, was American, on 25 May 2020, just 15 days ago. A video of the incident depicting the officer kneeling on George Floyd's neck for an extended period, like for 25 minutes, and public were totally refusing, totally requesting the police officer, the cop, to please leave that person, spare that person. This attracted widespread outrage, and this was well recorded in cameras. So attracted widespread, and the video has went viral across many social media handles and throughout the news section as well. Attracted widespread outrage, leading to local, national, and international protests, not only in US but in other countries, in Russia, in Spain, and in India as well. Although we don't have much racism in India, so demonstrations against police brutality, but the need for police reforms still emerges. Racism in policing, why it was observed, why it is present, why does it exist? The unrest began as a local protest in the Minneapolis, St. Paul metropolitan area of the Minnesota, before quickly spreading across the entire nation and also globally. We have a movement known as Black Lives Matter, which began after the acquittal of George Zimmerman. It is talking about of 2012. The discussion is of 2012. Police reforms have been a central part of the movement's demands, and protesters after the death of George Floyd articulated several desired outcomes, some of which have been addressed by federal, state, or local lawmakers. Coming to the next article, it is about Adani wins world's largest solar project to invest $6 billion. Please note this article is relevant from General Studies Paper 3, Economy, Indian Economy in particular, talking about solar project. What is the background of solar project in India? And solar power, how much India is much capable to invest in solar power and how much India does have the power to utilize solar energy. We have observed that in the past 5 years, India has invested a lot and lot of arrangements has been made with respect to investment in solar energy and solar power, which is very very significant. We want to discuss about the solar power or the solar power in India. We know India is a tropical country. It is a fast developing country. The capability to harness sun's energy, solar energy, is much higher than other countries. Also, India has lowest capital cost per megawatt globally to install solar power plants. But we must feel proud on our government that Indian government had an initial target of 20 gigawatt capacity for 2022, which was achieved 4 years ahead of schedule. Rooftop power Rooftop solar power accounts for 2.1 gigawatt, of which 70% is commercial. We should also take into account that the International Solar Alliance Summit was organized in late November 2017 when the daughter of Mr. Donald Trump, Ivanka Trump, arrived in Hyderabad, India. The International Solar Alliance, proposed by India as a founder member, is headquartered in India. India has also put forward the concept of one sun, one world, one grid to harness abundant solar power on a global scale. So, talking about the national solar potential, what is the national solar potential? So, we must discuss about the solar energy and with respect to the ability to harness sun's energy in kilowatt hours. So, what kind of potential will be with about 300 clear and sunny days in a year out of 365 total days in a year? Calculated solar energy incidence on India's land area is about 5,000 trillion kilowatt hours per year or 5 EWH per year. The solar energy available in a single year exceeds the possible energy output of all of the fossil fuel energy reserves in India. The daily average solar power plant generation capacity in India is 0.20 kilowatt hour per meter square of used land area. So this highlights how much India is capable in harnessing solar power. Going to the seventh article, talking about PM CARES Fund. We must know about PM CARES Fund, Prime Minister Citizen Assistance Relief in Emergency Situations Fund, formed on 28 March 2020 for COVID relief fund. But the question was that raised by opposition, although we have Prime Minister's National Relief Fund, what was the need to create a separate fund, PM CARES Fund? And also the government has clarified it does not come under the ambit of the Right to Information Act, or CAG cannot audit its, only independent authorities can audit PM CARES Fund. So relevant for General Studies Paper 2 Governance, we know about PM CARES Fund outside the ambit of RTI. So why PM CARES Fund was kept outside the ambit of RTIs, which is significant to discuss here. If we talk about the India, we have Prime Minister's National Relief Fund, we have Prime Minister's Citizen Assistance Relief in Emergency Situations, PM CARES Fund, very very significant to discuss. So the amount minimum to be donated is rupees 10. When we say about the PM CARES Fund, it was formed to counter the crisis, to counter the migrant laborers crisis. Many also suggested that government must donate the amount to migrant laborers to counter the coronavirus outbreak and also future pandemic-like situations. The chairman of the fund is Prime Minister. But what controversy it has sparked is that not micro donations, but also the donations will be tax exempt and fall under corporate social responsibility. So we must know about that why it is outside the Right to Information Act. Donations made to the state government's initiatives, such as the Chief Minister's Fund, do not qualify for corporate social responsibility obligation. The first allocations from the fund were announced 13 May. But the writer here has questioned that if PM really cares, then why does not it allows the Comptroller and Auditor General of India to audit its report? This we must understand that the PM CARES Fund controversy, we must understand the same situation why it does not falls under the ambit of RTI Act. We must know that what is a public authority under the RTI Act of 2005, how public authority is defined. We must know under the RTI Act, a public authority is mandated to provide information in response to an RTI application. But the government has clarified that PM Cares Fund is not a public authority. So the section 2H of the RTI Act defines public authority as the body established by the Constitution, body established by any law made by the Parliament, body established by law made by the state legislature. The latter part covers body established by a notification or order issued by the government and includes a body owned, controlled, or substantially financed by funds provided by the government, non-governmental organizations substantially financed by funds provided by the government. PM Cares Fund does not fall within the definition under category RTA Act of Public Authority because it has not been constituted under the Constitution or by Parliament. Now, is it body owned, or it is substantially financed by the government, or body created under notification or order issued by government? We must know the decision of Delhi High Court in National Stock Exchange of India Limited versus Central Information Commission case. The court held three conditions: owned, controlled, and substantially financed. PM Cares Fund falls under the definition of public authority because the government exercises substantial control over the fund. This can be argument, good argument. This was all about for this article. Relevant for General Studies Paper 2 Governance, the last article. How to be friends indeed, discussing about India-Nepal relations. Relevant for General Studies Paper 2 International Relations. In the backdrop of this context, we have seen that some hostile relations with Nepal is disliking India in the past 3 weeks. The developments have been well observed. India-Nepal relations, but what was about the past? It was a very cordial relationship that the rulers of Nepal, the Rana rulers of Nepal stated that neither government shall tolerate any threat to the security of the other by a foreign aggressor. So we also know Nepalis are granted many adjustments and many liberal behaviors there, many liberal sympathetic behaviors there in India. We know about that the relationship was initiated in 1950 Indo-Nepal Treaty of Peace and Friendship and accompanying secret letters that defined security relations between the two countries and an agreement governing both bilateral trade and trade transiting Indian territory. The 1950 Indo-Nepal Treaty of Peace and Friendship and letters exchanged between the Indian government was very significant. Also, you know that Indians are not allowed to own land properties or work in government institutions in Nepal, whereas Nepalese nationals who belong to Nepal, they are the residents of Nepal origin, if they reside in India, are allowed to work in Indian government institutions, except in the some states. We have some Goa and Meghalaya, maybe some states more, and also in civil services, Indian Foreign Service, Indian Administrative Service, Indian Police Service, IFS, IAS, and IPS. What happened in 2014 that after years of dissatisfaction by the Nepalese government, India agreed to revise and adjust the treaty to reflect the current realities. Despite the close linguistic, marital, religious, and cultural ties at people to people level between Indians and Nepalis since late 2015, political issues and border disputes have strained relations between the two countries, with anti-Indian sentiment growing amongst the government and people of Nepal. We have border disputes, border crossings as well, and also we must know about 2015 Madhesi crisis in Nepal. Nepal promulgated its new constitution in 2015, but the Madhesis, the Janjatis and Tharus, who are considered as the marginalized groups, felt they were being left out in the new constitution. These groups, Madhesi in particular, then blockaded the border points. The Nepalese government accused India of deliberately worsening the embargo trade. So what is embargo trade? In the context of this, you must know about embargo is a very significant trade to be discussed about. Like embargo is an official ban which is imposed. This was all about which needs to be understand from this article of the Indian Express. How to be friends in Nepal, relevant for General Studies Paper 2 International Relations. So let us recollect what we have discussed in today's analysis about this Indo-Nepal relations. Then PM Cares Fund, it does not fall under the ambit of the RTI Act, Right to Information Act. Then about relevant for solar power project of India, General Studies Paper 3 Economy. Then you have death of George Floyd, which is significant for discussing about racism and the need for policy reforms in United States, written for general studies paper on social issues. Then general studies paper on economy, foreign exchange reserves or forex reserves, why they are rising, why they matter in this times of COVID crisis. Then the academy we need very importantly to discuss about the general studies paper on education, the educational reforms which we need, and also seismometer or seismo which we use the earthquake sensor. In the past 2 months, we have observed 11 mild earthquakes have occurred in the national capital region of New Delhi, and also 8 earthquake sensors it needs to be installed, is going to be installed in the upcoming days, relevant for general studies paper 3 disaster management and India-China relations, international relations, at how backproofs key life of actual control points. Thank you.